It's Anne here. For those who are new to the Facebook page, I'm Anne Hutchison, and a huge welcome. And we always do a Facebook Live here on a Wednesday. So yeah, welcome. I always look forward to these chit chats. Always something interesting to bring, and they're usually focused on life in a spiritually mismatched marriage and how to thrive in that situation. You can see I've got something in my hand today. Sometimes I like to bring props to Facebook Live, and today it's a big block of butter. And I've got a word for us today, and it's this: the process of a spouse's heart softening is like butter. So when an unbelieving spouse is married to a believing one, you're in often for the long haul in terms of waiting for their heart to soften towards Jesus. And initially, it's like a block of butter. It's very hard. You come up against each other a lot, and you might try and share your faith with your spouse, and it doesn't make any imprint, any impact, and it feels like a pretty hard experience. But just like butter, if butter is left out in a warm room over a period of minutes, hours, that butter becomes beautifully soft. And at that point, you can cut into it and you can spread it, and it's lovely. And it's a completely different texture. So what I would say today is that you don't know all the ways in which that heart next to you is softening. And last week we had a post on our blog by one of our Somites, our long-term friends, Libby, and she described how God had shown her that the work of conversion is like a little acorn underground, where you often can't see what's going on underground, but you know, or God says, the spouse's heart, things are happening there. You just can't see it, and then eventually a shoot will come up and it will become evident what God has been doing. So it's the same sort of analogy as butter. So what is it that actually softens that butter in the spouse? What is it when they're living with us day by day, sleeping next to us, talking to us, connecting with us, or not? What is it that's softening that heart? And I think there's a couple of things really that I wanted to share today, a couple of thoughts. Marriage is a mystery. In Ephesians 5, Paul says it is a great mystery, marriage. It represents Christ and the church. And in that section in Ephesians 5, Paul talks about how marriage is about sort of learning to nourish and cherish each other. So when you are married, as a Christian, you kind of seize that, and you see it all as a lot more deep and meaningful than if you didn't have that grid to come into marriage with. So as a Christian, you see that one of your jobs as a spouse is to nourish and cherish the other person. I know it says that about husbands doing that to wives, but I think that's a broad thing, that one of your callings, if you are a married person, is to nourish and to cherish your spouse. And so you kind of do all you can to do that as a Christian spouse. And one of my friends, who's also in a spiritually different marriage like us, said that she thinks of it as a covenant relationship rather than it just being a consumer relationship. So people who don't have that kind of grid of faith might go into marriage. Probably when we were young, we went into marriage thinking like this: what will I get out of it? What will my spouse do for me? What's the benefit in it for me? But really, the mystery of marriage is that it's a covenant relationship where we put things in rather than consume. So it's covenant relationship rather than a consumer relationship. So I think that when you approach your marriage that way and you're living every day thinking, how can I show my commitment to my spouse? How can I nourish them? How can I cherish them? How can I treasure them? That sort of warmth, I believe, is what softens the butter, softens the heart. And I know that because of our circumstances, I've become very, very intentional and committed about my marriage, as we all have in this ministry. To have a faith difference actually makes you really intentional about your marriage. Yeah, that means that there's an intentionality in there that I walk in my home. And I think when we first had a faith difference in my home, my husband would often feel very insecure about it and say things like, "Oh, you're gonna go off me because I'm not Christian enough," or "I hate the fact you go to church, it makes me feel like you don't want to hang out with me at the weekend," and all this sort of stuff. And you will know what that feels like. Those conversations are really, really difficult, really challenging to have or to hear. It's really hard to hear when your spouse says things like that, when you feel that your faith is actually making them feel insecure and miserable. But if I look back, those conversations were conversations we had 5 years ago, and we no longer have those conversations, and he no longer says things like that. And I feel that he knows how cherished he is, and he knows the intentionality, even if I've never kind of articulated it to him. The second way that we soften the butter, I'd say, and this one's a bit harder, is to actually follow our faith and not compromise on it. And this is the part that might grate against our spouse and make them feel quite irritated, as in they feel the heat of the faith. So somewhere in Scripture, I can't remember where, I think it's one of the books of Corinthians, it says that to people who are saved, us believers are the aroma of Jesus Christ, and we're the aroma of life. But if you haven't yet bowed your knee to Jesus, the aroma of a Christian is actually quite offensive and annoying to you, as in it challenges things in your mind or in your heart that are going on. So to champion and walk out our faith, even when we're the aroma that's not feeling nice to our spouse, is also a hot thing. And it's not something that feels fluffy and warm and lovely to them, but it's hot enough that it makes them think, and it challenges them, and it goes some way to softening that butter. So for me, for an example of that is, in the early days, it was really difficult for me to go to church because it caused a lot of conflict between me and my husband. And as I've said, he didn't want me to go marching off into regular Sunday worship and leave him behind. He felt quite sort of abandoned, I think, on a Sunday. But I felt God say, and that was really difficult. I had to make some decisions about how I was going to walk this one, and was I going to even attend church. And eventually I came to the realization I have to be among believers, and so this is something I'm just going to have to do, like it or lump it. I mean, I did it nicely, and I said I'll not stay afterwards, too long, and so I was nice about it, but I said I'm really sorry. This is something I just have to do, and I really stand by it. And I felt God say, your choice to do that actually will have an impact on him, on his faith, on his belief. It will have an impact on your children. The visibility of you going week by week by week on a Sunday and being faithful and committed and visible about your faith actually will go some way to softening that heart. So, I think our job then is to see this as a marathon and not a sprint. We're in it for the long game, and perhaps the most important day of our marriage is the day that is the last day of our marriage, when we might stand beside our spouse's grave, even when we're old. And we look back and we can say to ourselves, I ran that race really well. I ran that race well. I nourished you, I cherished you, and now I'm standing here knowing that I've done good. So that's our job as believers, is to run the race well. And Hebrews 12:1 says, just keep on running that race. You've got a cloud of witnesses around you. You've got support networks. You need to lay aside the weight of the sin that easily ensnares you. So that's things like lay aside the unforgiveness, lay aside any feelings of frustration or whatever it is that's difficult about this, even though those feelings will come, and just keep on running. Because eventually you'll get really good at running this race. And what a reward to look back at the end and know that the heat of faith that you carried in all the different ways, faith looks hot, the heat of faith you carried eventually softened the butter of your spouse's heart. So I pray today for the spouses of this community that, Lord, you will stir up their spirits. And Lord, I pray that you will help them to see the things they need to see in us. And I pray for softened hearts, and I pray for stamina and perseverance in the Summites today. In each person who's watching, I bless you with endurance and stamina and strong legs for running that race. So lovely to chat today, and have a great week, and I'll see you again next week. Bye.